And welcome to the Amplifying Scientific Innovation video podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Sophia Ononye-Onyia, founder and CEO of the Sophia Consulting Firm, a WeBank certified life science marketing and communications consultancy that was established in New York City with the goal of amplifying scientific innovation. The goal of this podcast is to showcase the importance of science advocacy, health equity, and influential leadership through conversations with senior life science leaders who will share their unique perspectives on their leadership journey, corporate vision, and industry outlook. My guest today is Dr. Elizabeth Garner, Ni Onyemelupe, Chief Medical Officer of ObsEva, a clinical stage biopharmaceutical company focused on the clinical development and commercialization of novel therapeutics for serious conditions that compromise a woman's reproductive health and pregnancy. I previously met Elizabeth in person prior to the pandemic at the Hyatt Grand Central, New York, and we connected based on our shared Nigerian heritage and passion for women's health. Welcome to the show, my Nigerian sister, Dr. Garner.
Thank you.
Well, it's my pleasure. So I always start the show the same way, which is to ask you a simple but very provocative question, which is, what is your definition of scientific innovation?
Great starting question, I will say. And, it's one of those things that, you hear it all the time, but then you're like, all right, well, what is the definition? So, I thought about this a little bit and, I even went to, the dictionary and I'm like, okay, what's innovation? How's it defined? And, I would say simply it's, creating new solutions, right? But I think one thing that's important and kind of the way I think about it is there's a very wide range, right, of innovation. Innovation can be incremental, maybe something around the edges to maybe improve something that already exists. And then it can go all the way to really, really radical solutions, developing something that's totally new approach to something or a product. And for me, when I think about scientific innovation, specifically as it relates to health, it's the fulfillment of an unmet need, right? Something that is really an unmet need, a problem. So in other words, a new solution to a problem. And I see it as, from the scientific perspective, as the use of scientific data, right, that actually leads to true change in treatment paradigms. So for example, new medical treatment for conditions that have historically been treated surgically. So like ovarian cancer is a good example. It's treated surgically, but we need new innovations to be able to treat this more as a medical condition. Something that substantially improves outcomes. For me, one of the things I think about all the time in women's health is, like preterm labor. We need a real innovation there based on the science, or how we understand preterm labor, to truly change the treatment and develop something brand new. So for me, when I think about innovation, I'm thinking about not just improvements around the edges, slightly better, but real radical change in treatment.
I absolutely love that definition, fulfillment of an unmet medical need, because ultimately as a physician, you know firsthand, it's about, innovation is about patient impact. That's how we measure ourselves. So thank you for that great definition. So my next question for you is, I found this out maybe a few weeks ago when I published that article on WebMD about the approval of the malaria vaccine, that we're actually both born in Enugu, Nigeria. So how did growing up in a developing sub-Saharan African country shape your career journey as a physician and industry C-suite executive?
Well, listen, first of all, isn't it amazing? 2 women born in Enugu. I love it. Talking over here, right, in the US about innovation in science. It's just, and you already talked about how we met,
that's so crazy.
Yeah, it's crazy. And we could say it's by chance. I don't think it was by chance, really, but so look, I definitely growing up, in sub-Saharan Africa gives me what I would call a global view, right? I'm always thinking globally, pretty much at all times. I also don't take anything for granted, right? When you've lived in a world where, it's tough, it's not easy. And, simple things that people take for granted here, are not available. You really, sort of think about that all the time, right? So, when I hear people complaining about sort of small, it's like, look, we have it good here. So, and that has helped me think about things as I kind of went into becoming a physician. I think coming from where I came from and seeing so much in terms of just basic healthcare that just wasn't present, that definitely drove me to go into this area. And it sort of goes back to kind of the first question, really, around I want to help create solutions and innovations, and also think about how can we get those solutions and innovations to the people who need them the most. Now, this is challenging because in the pharma industry, as we all know, I mean, it's a profit-making industry, right? And shareholders are kind of the main stakeholders. So we don't often focus on the needs of people without access. That said, I think by being in the C-suite, I can be influential, right? I can at least always remind people, about those populations that exist here in the US as well, of course, but all around the world. And there are things I can do too around, for instance, strongly encouraging diversity in clinical trials, right? Let's at least make sure our products are studied in currently underrepresented populations. Then also, since I work for a public company, a lot of the work I also do is toward advocacy and thinking about, developing world in particular is through nonprofit work that I do, nonprofit board work, through speaking at conferences, panels, and constantly talking about diversity in clinical trials, unmet needs in developing world, and so on. So yes, absolutely, growing up in sub-Saharan Africa and specifically in Nigeria had a tremendous influence on me.
Well, thank you for sharing that. Your passion for health equity just screams off the screen. I get it and I applaud it. And obviously, it's something that I'm equally just as passionate about. So thank you for sharing that. And now I'd like to hear more about ObsEva. Can you provide a top-line update of ongoing work at your company?
Yeah, so it's been a busy year. ObsEva, is a tiny company, less than 50 people, based in Switzerland. We have some folks over here. Some of our management team is over here. Our CEO is in California, so we are sort of global, which again speaks to my own background and one of the things I like about the company. So we've had a lot of great things happen this year. First of all, the candidate product that we were developing for treatment of preterm labor. I already mentioned the importance for me of preterm labor needing treatments. Our candidate product was actually licensed to Organon earlier this year. That is huge news, right? Because for small companies like us, sometimes there are questions. You're so small. Could you possibly be doing things the right way, and so on. For us to have Organon validate the work that we had done in the phase 1 and early phase 2 programs, to have that validated and licensed into Organon to take the further development of this is great news for us. And also, a company like Organon has the person power, right, to get that job done and hopefully bring this product to market. So very exciting. We also just announced that the FDA accepted our submission for the approval of uterine fibroids for our other product, Linzagolix. We also anticipate European approval of that same product in the first quarter of this coming year. So very exciting. We also recently announced that we are partnering with a company called Syneos to help us commercialize Linzagolix once it is approved. And then we'll also be getting results from our first phase 3 trial in endometriosis by the end of this year. So a lot happening. And we're also at the same time, because our product for preterm labor was licensed out, the uterine fibroids Linzagolix program is mostly done. So now we're starting to think about our future too. And one thing we're really thinking about is how can we have the greatest impact, right, on health for women more broadly. And as you described the company, right, you mentioned reproductive health, which for us remains very, very important. But we believe we should be broadening it a little bit more, right? So we're thinking more in terms of health for women, not just reproductive health, but all the conditions that affect women, whether it's only women that are affected or whether it's, women are affected more than men, right? A lot of mental health stuff that women suffer more than men, or ways that women may suffer differently. They may have a different, presentation of a condition than men. Like, for instance, cardiovascular disease, right? Number one killer of women in the menopause, but women have heart attacks in a very different way than men. So we're thinking about all of those conditions as well and thinking about ways that we can broaden out our impact, right, on the overall health of women. So it's an exciting time for us.
I'm super excited. Organon is obviously a big one. I will be interviewing the Chief Communications Officer at Organon, Wendy Lund, and I think will be interesting. Yes, I think that Organon came into the market and understood the space, and really for a company like ObsEva to be immediately noticed and to get this license and go, that says a lot for what you do. And I love the new focus and perhaps a more comprehensive look at women beyond just their physiological or reproductive health. What about their mental health, for example? Yeah. That's really compelling. And speaking of women, so women's health represents roughly 4% of R&D investment dollars, even though women make up more than 50% or 51% of the population and make more than 80% of our household decisions. So why do you think this is the case? And what can women's health companies do to build investor confidence?
Yeah, so this is something I talk about all the time. Look, I think at the end of the day, one of the biggest problems we still face is when it comes to investment, right, in women's health, the vast majority of the ultimate decision makers are men, right? So, and look, there have been great strides, great advances, right? I mean, we're seeing improvement. We're seeing women getting to, higher and higher levels of decision making. But for me, until that final person who has to say yes or no to an investment, until more of those people are women, I don't think we'll see quite the progress we want to make. So I think we've got to aim for women truly being at the top, not just the higher levels, but at the very, very top. So that's something I'm very focused on and talking about a lot. The other piece for me is, look, I don't think that we can expect men to understand what women deal with in terms of health, right? Unless, and I've seen this often, in my various interactions with investors, which are very frequent, of course, I see that unless a man has somehow direct experience that has impacted him, right? Whether it's he has a baby that was born prematurely, or he has a partner who had preeclampsia, or he's suffered from infertility, either himself or with a partner. It's those people that have had some kind of direct experience that, get it, right?
Yeah.
So I think we have to, and nothing we can do about sort of increasing those numbers. Obviously, we don't want to. We don't want more people to have these problems. But I think we've got to really explain this stuff, right? And bring kind of the reality of what women are facing. And just, I think we need to educate, right? Because we can't expect men to understand, right? A man is going to easily understand a drug for prevention of heart disease or cholesterol stuff. They're dealing with it all the time, but they're not dealing with the problems that women are dealing with. So I think it's an educational piece. And I think for those of us who have a platform and a voice and access to investors, really it's up to us to teach, educate. I think that one of the messages there too is, I think that women's health companies can also help investors to understand why it's beneficial for all of us when women are healthy, right? So it's not only necessarily specific information on the conditions, but just explaining like, look, work productivity is going to be better if your women in your company are healthy and working, right, and not missing work. You're going to have more revenue potentially if women are there, so that sort of thing. Why is it beneficial why is it? And I think a simple way to think about it is when women are healthier, everyone rises together, right? So it's not, for me, it's not either or. It's everyone needs better health. And then lastly, for me, I believe a huge problem, and one that I talk about, writing about, is stigma, right? Huge problem. We're not comfortable talking about our issues, sometimes even with other women. Yeah. And never mind to men. We do not talk about this stuff. So we need to really work on normalizing infertility, miscarriage, heavy menstrual bleeding, pelvic pain. We need to normalize it and talk about it without any shame, without any fear, right? And I think that's going to take some time, but it's something I'm really, really talking about a lot and encouraging.
Well, extremely well said. Growing up in Nigeria, I went to a boarding school, and we were taught that ladies are not heard where they're not seen. And so there's this sort of, from the time you're 2 years old, for as long as you can remember as a woman, it's always been to sort of repress yourself a little bit and don't speak about those things. So thank you for encouraging the conversation about normalizing women's health issues, right? So that we can all be aware, and maybe if those conversations are at the forefront, then the investment dollars will come in a bit more frequently, in addition to, of course, having more women in the C-suite and in board. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. And one other thing I think also, is I think that, unfortunately, and it's a vicious cycle too, right? Without investment, it's difficult for women's health companies to really kind of have success, right? With the stuff that they're working on, or with, their commercialization and things like that. So I'm hoping, that in the very near future, somebody has, a big success, right? In particular, I'm talking about one of these smaller companies, right? Mm-hmm. So look, we hope ObsEva will have a big success with linzolix. But there are many other companies, Daré, as you know, well, and others that, I think have brilliant people at the helm, and, just together, hopefully with all of us having successes in the market I'm talking about, this will help to increase, investor awareness and confidence.
Yes, absolutely. And Daré, obviously, I'm on the board of Daré, and it's a company that I feel quite passionately about. And the CEO of Daré, Sabrina Johnson, is also going to be a guest on this season of the podcast.
Oh, good.
Yes, more women's health discussions. To your point, if you have a platform, leverage that to amplify the issues that matter. So thank you for that. Now, when I think about you, I imagine that along the course of your career, across continents, you've had mentors that have helped to shape who you are today. Are there any notable mentors that you'd like to mention that have supported you over the years?
Yes, indeed. Many, many, many. I've not been a person that necessarily goes after sort of formal mentorship. I don't know. For whatever reason, that's not typically worked for me, but naturally, right? The folks that I work with, I try to identify people that I look up to, and that can really sort of be an example, sounding board, that kind of thing. But going back to sort of, younger years, my dad was a key mentor for me, rest his soul. He passed away in 2020, but he always wanted to get into the weeds of what I was doing, right? Really more about the business side of things. He knew nothing about health or biology, but he was just such a great thinker, right? And just a great teacher. I mean, literally, I would be talking to him, hate to admit it, in my car sometimes, driving from work. I would literally be taking notes as I'm driving. I'm like, gotta write this down. I mean, because, the way he would put things was always so helpful. So he has been huge. And then I've been fortunate, I think, to have just excellent bosses, right? And in particular, I think the 3 CEOs that I've worked with directly as a C-suite, member myself, the 3 CEOs have each in his own way. They're all so different. I'm not sure you can have 3 polar opposites, but somehow they are. But each has been very, very instrumental in my own growth as a leader. I'm very, very grateful for those working relationships. And there's so many others, but those are some key ones.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I'm sorry, of course, to hear about your dad. I think that, fathers play such an important role in shaping their daughters' lives. And I think it's particularly unique for you because a lot of African dads sometimes would sway their daughters away from science or from medicine. So it's really unique for you to have a special dad. And I think, as you mentioned too, with the different CEOs that you've worked with, there's always something new you could learn, and formal mentorship will be just as important as informal mentorship. Thank you for sharing those stories. All right, so we only have 2 or 3 questions left, so we'll make it fun and exciting, right? So what are some unique challenges that women of color face in biotech leadership, especially in women's health, and what coping strategies have you adopted over the years?
Yeah, certainly a lot of challenges. I think, especially in women's health, there are few women, believe it or not, in women's health. You know that, right? And there are even fewer women of color in women's health, right, working in this industry. I not infrequently, when I'm on various, different calls or conversations or various situations, I sort of jot down to myself, like, how many times do I actually see another woman on the other side or another woman of color? I mean,
right.
Virtually never, right? I mean, I can count on probably one hand. So it's really something. So, that's a huge challenge for us. We need to do better. We need more women in women's health. If you look at boards, even, of women's health companies, there are women's health companies boards that don't even have women on the board, so thankfully, I think that's changing. But certainly women of color on those boards, we need increasing numbers. And then, as I said before, I think we need women at the top, right? Mm-hmm. More women at the top and more women, of color at the top. I think other challenges, just for me personally as a woman of color, all of this yourself, right? I'm often underestimated, have to prove myself, so it's hard work, every day.
Yep.
But, I think I've just, look, it's just been so long. I've gotten used to it. So I remind myself, I make a point to remind myself not to stress about it and just to deal with it and just step it up, as needed. Microaggressions are real. I think for anyone who doesn't believe they are real, those are folks who haven't lived in our shoes, right? And I think they can take a while even sometimes to hear or understand or realize. So I actually keep a list, believe it or not. And I think often about how I can manage that same situation if it comes up later.
Right.
And my other coping strategy also is talking about it. My life partner, my husband hears a lot. So I think just, being able to share your experiences with others is key.
No, I couldn't agree with you more. And again, extremely well said. So when you think about the life science industry, what do you think are some key factors that will be important for sustaining innovation in our industry?
Yeah, I think, investment. So many, we've talked about this, so many small companies trying to do good work, getting the word out and continuing to do what you are doing, right? Which is talking about this, focusing on, innovation and doing everything we can to move investment and keep investment going. I think we've got to be advocates at the government level, making sure there continue to be funding at the NIH and academic, centers to help to sort of keep the pipeline going. So really investment in every way. I think more education also at the high school, college level, graduate level. I didn't know anything about life science industry as I was going through school. If I had known about this sort of work much earlier, maybe I would have jumped in sooner. So I think a lot more education in the younger years would be also helpful.
Wonderful. And my final question for you is very simple. Do you have any other comments or thoughts that you'd like to share with our audience before we wrap today?
I think all I would say is thank you, honestly, for what you're doing, because I think these conversations are just so important. Getting the word out about, health equity and leadership and women leaders of color and investment, all this stuff is so important. So really, it's just, my thought is to say thank you to you for doing this. So appreciated.
Well, thank you for gracing us with your presence and just your candor. You're natural. You took us on a journey from Africa back here to New York City. And I think that it's a testament of who you are. And I hope that we can feature more leaders like you on our platform, because as you say, education is part of the evolution, the journey. So thank you so much for everything.
My pleasure. Thank you.
I hope to see you again some other time. Take care now, okay? All right, bye-bye.
Good to see you.
Good to see you too.